Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so we're in the GDP section, almost like take two, right? I was meant to start talking about GDP and actually ended up being an intro section, but this is going to be, it's going to be a little bit like that. I almost wish I had you in the room and we could almost be an informal chat, because I feel like, and don't worry, it's going to be like that actually. That's how I want it to be. Almost imagine we're in a room and we're talking, because that I feel is the best way to learn and to understand, is not to make it too formal and structured. And the reason I say that is because GDP is incredibly complex, okay? And I'll be honest with you, it's one of the most daunting parts of this course. I have not been looking forward to this section. It's kind of why I took the time out that I mentioned before, between doing the dashboard section and this section. It's because I was literally racking my brains out thinking, how do I explain something so vast and complex and so important and do it justice? And I realized I can't do it with diagrams and words. The only way I can do it is more, like I said, having a talk with you. We're going to go through the amazing, it's actually going to be brilliant. I can't wait. I'm really excited. We're going to go through the, I was just looking at it there because I've got the website ready. The BEA website, the Bureau, the federal organization, the government organization that produces GDP. We're going to go through it together, right? Because what I did a lot of research for this section, and I've done the research anyway. 15-20 years ago when I joined an investment bank, I did a lot of research, and I thought about, okay, let me do the research and kind of show people what's in, regurgitate the research. And then I realized, rather than doing that, let's go through it together, right? It's probably the best way to do it, is to go through the website together, so you can understand how GDP actually comes together. So what we're going to do, rather than having lots of slides and pictures, like I said, because it's just not going to do it the justice that, even though right now it sounds like I'm all over the place, believe me, I'm not. It's going to be so, your understanding is going to be so much better if you just allow me to explain it to you in a bit more of an informal setting, almost like we're just having a chat about it, because it's so vast, and I can just take you through the kind of maze. We can navigate it together, right? Rather than me just kind of giving you my understanding and then saying, hey, go and read a whole bunch of stuff. Let's go and do it together. What I am going to do before we do that, there is some stuff. Let's just have a quick chat about what GDP is without getting straight into the website. So when I say the website, if you remember, on the calendar, so I'm just going to bring up the calendar. So if you remember on the calendar, it was the final week, wasn't it? So there you go, final GDP. If you remember, if you just open it up, as I mentioned to you, it's got the source, the Bureau of Economic Analysis. Right, so we're going to go through all of this. There's an incredible amount of information, right? It's just vast, like the amount of information is. It's actually quite scary, right? And even for an institutional trader like myself of 20 years, I'm very happy to admit that it's a lot of information. You can imagine a lot of you that have never seen that before, especially for me, someone who's got very high standards and wants to make sure you have the right understanding, a full understanding of it. How on earth do I get this across to you? So the point is, we're going to go through a lot of stuff together on that website, because initially I thought, right, there's no way I can do that. I'm going to have to just give you guys the website and say, hey, but then I would feel like I haven't really done my job, and I really want this to be the best fundamentals course. So we're going to go through it together. But before we do that, the point is, rather than just jump straight into that, let's have a quick chat about GDP, what it kind of is from my perspective. Then we'll go and have a look at the official website and see what they say it is, and ultimately we can come to a conclusion together, to make sure that it is what we think it is. And I say that because we all hear about GDP, right? And I don't think there's anyone who's watching this right now who hasn't heard of the words GDP, right? I may not know exactly what it is. You may know a lot about it. It doesn't matter. We're all going to start from the same spot. I'm assuming that hardly anyone knows exactly what it is. And by the end of this, you'll probably, you'll think, oh my God, I didn't realize I knew so little about it, because the stuff I'm going to show you is incredibly comprehensive and detailed. But GDP essentially is gross domestic product, right? Again, you'll be thinking, I knew that, Envy, that's fine. So, great, you know what that is. Think about it, right? So again, this is kind of, we're going to go through the official definitions, website and all of that. But right now, this is just my understanding of it that I've developed. And what I want you to think about GDP as, right? What does gross domestic product mean? Forgetting about the official definitions. What is domestic product? What is it? What does it mean, right? It's produce, basically. That's the word, right? Product. Basically, what is a product? It's an item, right? So, I was going to pick up my phone and show you, but I'm not going to do that. But, let's say you have an iPhone, you have a physical product, but it can also be a service, right? A service is a product, right? You sell it. You can sell a service, and ultimately, that is what GDP is, right? It's gross domestic product. Domestic being, domestic obviously of a country. So it's the product of a country. How much product is produced of a country? Essentially, that is what it is, right? And there's no other way of me putting it. And I kept thinking, how can I best describe this? But really, I think I'm happy with how that's come out, because that is essentially what it is. And that's why I've put here end goal. Because, you might be wondering, why have I put end goal? And maybe you're not. But over here, if you look at the dashboard, it's the last thing. And we know, having done the section together, that it's one of the last things that gets released. At the end of a period. It's the end of the quarter. And then 30 days later, isn't it? I think it's written here. Released quarterly 30 days after the quarter ends, right? So you've got so much data. CPI gets released 3-4 times before GDP even comes out. So you might be thinking, well, why is it the end goal? Well, that is why it's the end goal. Now, obviously, we got to be careful here not to think of it too much from the wrong perspective. But right now, I'm saying to you, don't imagine you're not a trader, right? So the reason I'm saying all of this is, forget it. You're not a trader right now. You're just a normal, human being. We all are, but as in, you're just basically not a trader. Okay, you've just got a job, and basically you're not even interested in trading. That's how I want you to think of GDP right now, because ultimately, from that perspective, it's everything, isn't it? And even for governments, for other agencies, organizations, politicians, obviously the Federal Reserve when they're setting monetary policy, and companies, and many organizations, ultimately it is all about GDP, because they're not trading, right? They're not sitting there thinking, what's the number today? How can I trade it? No, they're thinking more, what's the health of the economy? Because then I should be, expanding my business, or, we're in a recession right now. I'm not going to expand my business because probably people aren't spending money. And do you see? So for most people, they're not looking at economic data the way that traders do, right? Can you see why I said it's better we do this informally? Because I don't feel this is explained very well, to be honest. It's all very formal, formal definitions of GDP. And when I was doing research for this section, normally I don't do much research, but because obviously I am a trader, right? I'm not sitting here every day teaching GDP, or I'm not an economics teacher, and I don't really look at the definitions of GDP. I just know what it is. But all of a sudden, I'm faced with this task of having to teach a lot of people about GDP. So obviously, I wanted to do some decent research. And when I was doing the research, I just couldn't find anything that really explained GDP well at all. I went on the central bank websites of many different countries to see if I could find any material, and there really wasn't anything, and I realized I need to just explain it to you in my own way, informally, because I feel like that's the best way you're going to really grasp this concept. And again, forgive me if you understand already what I'm talking about, but obviously if you don't, all I'm saying to you is don't think of this from a trader's perspective. Think of it from a, just a consumer, basically a person living on planet Earth who either has a job or a business, or, for most people, ultimately it is about economic growth. Even though you don't wake up thinking about economic growth, that is ultimately what you want. You want there to be economic growth, because with economic growth, you have better standards of living. You get better things. We may not like to admit it. Obviously, many of you know I've done meditation, all of that, and obviously I do strive to be someone who isn't materialistic. But let's be honest, 99% of people, including myself, we want nice things, right? How do you value your existence every day? Is obviously you strive for better things, right? You want a better car, you want a better house, you want better things, products, okay? This may sound like I'm going on and on, but I cannot tell you all of this stuff I'm saying. It all relates back to GDP, okay? You want better things, you need GDP basically to go up, okay? So again, what is GDP? Well, GDP is a measure, okay, of all these products, right? We need to know. There's different ways of measuring, obviously you could measure people's happiness, but very difficult to measure. What are you going to do? Send a survey out to everyone? You don't. To make economic decisions, if you're a central bank and you need to decide whether interest rates are going to go up, if you're a government and you need to decide whether you need to stimulate the economy through government spending, you need to do things with your budget deficit. As a trader or an investor, you need to decide where to put your money or take your money out of. You need to know about some sort of prospects of a country. You need to know in some format, a standardized format, how well a country is doing, okay? And you can see the most obvious way of doing that. Let's be honest, we're all materialistic people, but also from a practical perspective and measurement perspective, the most obvious way is to look at how is a country doing economically. Would you agree? Okay, so it took me a while to get there, but eventually that's what we're talking about. Economically, how is a country doing, right? Is it doing well? Is it doing poorly? That is measured by basically its production, right? Would you agree? And why is that? Because again, I talked about it to an extent. Obviously, if product or produce is going up, then there's more jobs, right? Okay. If there's more jobs, there's more income. Okay. You think about it. If you're on $50,000 a year and suddenly your salary goes up to 60, to 70, to 80, to you that's progress in life. Okay. I'm not saying, I know there's going to be the odd people who, and I'm not even saying this in any critical way. In fact, I admire them, people who do live on mountains, and obviously to them this isn't important. I'm talking about 99% of us. Be honest with yourself. You want more income, you want a better job. Produce is going up. Where is that produce going? Back to you. It gets sold in shops, right? So you get better things, basically. This is what I struggled to really find when I was researching for this section. People weren't explaining it in this way. There was too many formal definitions, and it wasn't it didn't make sense to me, and the way I'm explaining it to you now, like I said, we're going to have a look at the way that I look at GDP, and then obviously I could be wrong or right, but to me, seems to be the most sensible and most practical, useful way of thinking of GDP. Really, it all comes down to things, right? Things like pens, cameras, anything, phones, computers, cars, watches, you name it. I'm looking around, wallets and services, you know, better hairdressers, better lawyers, better doctors, those are services, all of those. You know, you think about it, those services improve, would you agree? A country prospers more. Better things, right? Ultimately. And then if you think about it, more people, what do they want? They want those things, okay? So if people are getting those things, ultimately, what does that mean? More is being produced, so GDP is that produce, GDP is going up, okay? So probably what I've done there is I've given a whole variety of ways of thinking about GDP, but ultimately we've said it here in one line. It's the final value of all the goods and services a country produces. The reason you might be thinking AMV is, and I just realized it's written there, but why didn't you just say that line and that's it? Because I don't want you to just think of it as, you know, that is what it is. It's because I want you to realize why it's so important and why people want it. Why do people want GDP to be growing, and why is it such an important kind of end goal? You know, why is it an end goal? And it's for all the reasons I mentioned before. It's because ultimately, to me, you know, in everyday society, that is how people measure their lives, their happiness, their sort of well-being, their standard of living, right? Is GDP going up? Are more things being produced? Is my country getting richer? Essentially, you know, is this, it's everything. Do you see why I say it's everything? It's the end goal. Because if GDP goes up, the size of the economy goes up, right? Why? Because what is an economy? An economy is the sum of all the products it produces, essentially, right? Incomes go up, standards of living go up. We talked about that. Obviously, you want your income to go up. You know, and I've put here from a trader's perspective, people don't care if above is true, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. But ultimately, let's just summarize very quickly what I've been saying. So it's goods and services. So, you know, this could be things like, and we're going to see this on the web. I think it's on the website. I can't remember, but you know, things like computers, furniture, housing stock, right? All the components that go into it, housing stock, and honestly, anything you can imagine. I mean, this list could be hundreds of, probably a million items, right? Paper, just anything. Think of stuff you buy every day, you know, just bread. Obviously food goes in there, pens, furniture, computers, and all of these things getting better over time, right? Camera, phones. Honestly, this list could go on. You know, I want you to think of it. Think of like 10 items that you've got in your room that contributes to GDP, basically. Okay, that's been produced at some point. It may not necessarily be this year, but at some point it was produced, and that will actually go into GDP. I guess what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to bring this to life for you, to show you what GDP actually is. And then services is all sorts of services, haircut, you know, personal training. I think we talked about it in the foundation course, right? Personal training, any services you can think of. Lawyers, doctors. Sorry, I know my handwriting isn't the greatest. And can you see again why GDP is so important? Because these things can get better, you know, better houses, better pens, better furniture, better computers, better phones, better cameras, better bread, better paper, services, you know, better haircuts, better personal trainers, better lawyers, better doctors, right? All of these things, you know, over time, think about 50 years ago, the standard of doctors, the standard of hairdressers, the standard of personal trainers, the standard of computers. What's happened? It's gone up. How do we measure that? GDP. Okay, that is what's happening when new computers, if a new computer gets produced, that goes into domestic product, a new product. Okay, it's new, has been produced, so GDP grows. As it said here, final value of all the goods and services a country produces. I wanted to talk about this, and I know it may sound like you're in an economics lecture and I'm going on and on. It's not, because I just, think about it. It's not explained this. People just become use fundamentals in trading and they don't actually think what is GDP. They just assume, hey, GDP is important, I need the number to go up, and hey, market should rise and all that. No, you've got to think about actually what is this number, what's GDP actually telling me. Many of you may know this already, some of you may not. Now you know. It's basically the final value of goods and services, everything imaginable that can be recorded at least. Obviously there'll be things like in the illegal markets like drugs and people like drug dealers selling drugs. You won't be able to record that in GDP. Obviously, how do you record that? You can't. But 90% of things can be recorded. So everything that is possible to produce in a year, in a particular year, for that year, is basically GDP, equals gross domestic product. So that's why, and don't worry, I'm finished now. That's why we need GDP to go up, right? And that's why it's good, because if more goods are being produced, more services are being produced, better goods are being produced, better services are being produced, what's going to happen? The economy, the economic health, standards of living, prosperity. If more things are being produced, you need more people to produce them. More jobs, right? More jobs. If people have more jobs, more income, right? If people have more income, they're going to spend more. If people spend more, companies make more profits. They can reinvest those profits to do what? Make better things. Profits. Business investment, right, into better items, and then the whole thing can just keep flowing, right? We'll talk a little bit about those flows, but essentially that is what GDP is. That's my best take on it. So hopefully that was useful for you. Now the reason I've written here, we're going to get into the website and we're going to get more into the technicalities of GDP, how it's calculated and all of that in a moment. I just wanted to explain to you why it's important. From a trader's perspective, okay, I've put here, don't care if above is true. I'm only going to talk about this very briefly. So you've got to think, I think I talked about this a little bit in the first section, a lot about not, having the right perspective on things. So trader, economist, government, FOMC, which is, or any central bank, I should put here, central bank. They're all going to approach GDP differently, okay? For the majority of these people, I said it before, GDP is going to be very high up on their list. Right, for us, it's going to be much lower. Okay, and I'll say this very briefly again. I did mention it before. Think about it. Now that I've explained it to you in the way that, and you can see why I went on and on about it, because it's really important you understand it for what it is. If you're a government, you need to, what is your job? Your job is to make sure that everyone's general prosperity is high, right? Obviously, politically, from a political perspective, you obviously want to be re-elected, so there's that. But also, from a moral perspective and just the whole point of you being in government, why are you there? Because you're trying to raise people's standards of living, have prosperity, have a good economy, a good country to live in, and that's the whole point of being in government, right? They don't always do the best job of it, but ultimately that is the baseline that they try to aim for. An economist is constantly thinking about GDP and where's GDP going to end up, and ultimately that is what they're trying to predict to an extent. And then FOMC and the central bank, even though they're independent from government, ultimately, if you think about it, what happens? The government chooses the Fed chairman, right? The government will choose who the central bank typically will have as their leader. They're not allowed to influence them in theory. They can't tell them where to set interest rates. It's got to be 100% independent. But the point is, the two organizations are linked, right? They have the same goal. Like I said, a government's goal is to make sure its citizens are prospering and doing well. How? How do they do that? By having a good central bank, a good monetary policy committee, FOMC, to pull those levers of interest rates and balance sheet, obviously all the other levers that they have to make that happen, right? They work in tandem. They work together as organizations, as country organizations, to make sure that people have these things, right? Now, the point is, to do that, the government needs measures to look at, right? They can't you don't just open your window one day and say, oh yeah, everyone looks pretty happy, so I'm doing a good job. Obviously, as a government, you need a number. You need, GDP grew by 2% or 3%, and again, we'll get into that. The central bank is the same thing. They need a number, right? To be like, the economy grew by 3%. Maybe we can be a little bit more aggressive with interest rates, or we can do certain things to make sure that's sustained. Or, oh my God, we had a recession. The economy is shrinking, right? There's contraction in the economy. We need to change interest rates to stimulate the economy. Can you see, without knowing what GDP is, right? And the point is, it's very high on their agenda because it helps them do their job, right? For us, can you see, for traders, completely different, right? I hate to say it, I do care, but I don't care as much as the government do, or care as much as the FOMC do, because it's not my job to stimulate GDP, right? Their job every day is to make sure that GDP, is healthy, essentially, that a country's economic health of a country is healthy, right? And standards of living and so on and so forth. I hope everyone sees what I'm getting. I'm saying it many, many times, but hopefully by the end of this, everyone watching this will get what I'm saying. Why GDP is a little bit lower for us as traders. We don't care so much. The reason I actually wrote don't care if above is true is it's more to do with this standards of living thing. And, ultimately there's a bit of an argument in the sort of, just generally, I guess, amongst people, I guess in the financial community, not necessarily financial, but just generally in the government, economic and central bank community, I guess, as to, and I guess just in general, amongst the public, whether GDP is the best measure to kind of measure people's standards of living, right? And that's what I've written here. Traders don't care about this. And the reason I'm saying this is because I did study economics, and I know there'll be some people here, and I guess I'm just trying to say, don't get too bogged down in, I need to get deep into economics as a trader. You don't, okay? It's dangerous. And I think that's why I've put that there, and I'm going to speak just for a couple of minutes about it. Don't worry. And in fact, a lot of you will be relieved because you'll think, oh my God, Envy's going to take us on this whole crazy economics journey. Maybe I need to go and study economics at university and come back and then do it. No. So you're going to waste your time, okay? As a trader, I don't care about whether the definition of GDP is correct. I really don't even care if the way they calculate it, which we're going to get into, is correct. Whether there's a better way of measuring the prosperity of a country, because, in theory, GDP, to talk about it crudely, is basically how many iPhones were produced, how many people had iPhones last year. If the economy grew, more people probably were able to afford gadgets and iPhones. And do you see, we're assuming that is ultimately what makes a country's people happy. Do you see, you could argue about this for hours, and people will say, no, well, actually, that's not a better quality of family life. And I hear a lot of this, debate going on amongst economists. And my point is, as traders, I really don't care. I don't care whether GDP is the best measure, whether the Big Mac index, and there is all these things out there where people have all these crazy measures of people's happiness. I don't care. As a trader, I only care about ultimately, what is the most widely accepted measure is GDP. That's the number that turns up on my calendar at the end of the quarter or 30 days later. And that's what I'm going to accept as the measure of prosperity. Okay, so my point is, we're going to go on the assumption, as we now move on to the rest of the section, that GDP is the best measure of a country's economy, health, prosperity. We want it to be good. I don't know, unless you want, obviously you wouldn't want your country's prosperity to be bad. Of course you want it to be good, because then you benefit from it, right? So we're going to assume that GDP is the best measure. That's the only reason I put that in about traders not caring, because like I said, so here, just kind of finish off on the slides before we get into kind of the calculations of GDP and how to really break it down. GDP going up, and I said this already, right, means people are earning, right, because more things are being, factories, and probably the worst picture of a factory, more things are being produced, right? If more things are being produced, more people have jobs, because companies need people to produce the stuff. If more people have jobs, income, earning, okay? If more people have income, they're spending, right? Okay, so it's all good. And then obviously if people are spending, as I said before, companies are earning profits, which they can then reinvest into, making more things, and so on and so forth. Now if GDP, and we've got it here, right? So kind of repeating the point here. Businesses are earning profits, right? Hiring, spending more, and so on and so forth. And vice versa, right? So that's why you need it to go up, because if GDP was going down, essentially, businesses would be losing money. They're going to be, I hate to say it, but getting rid of people, sacking people, losing jobs, underspending. Can you see it's very bad for an economy if GDP goes down? And then just finally kind of talked about it. So on the previous slide, it doesn't necessarily measure happiness. Okay, and I just want to acknowledge that. I don't want you to think, hey, envy's, I don't know the word for it, but I don't want you to think, envy is, I don't know the word for it, but some sort of money-hungry guy, and all he cares about is the wealth of the country, and that is people being happy. And look, I understand there's other things that can make people happy, but how do you measure that? You can't measure people's family time and happiness it gives them and stuff, and obviously that is important. But as a trader, right, that's what I say, don't be an economist or a philosophist or a philosopher, or be a trader, right? Be ruthless as a trader. I hate to say it, but I don't care, don't give monkeys about all this stuff. As a trader, as a human being, I do. When I finish trading, obviously I want people to be happy, but when I'm trading, I don't care about whether GDP measures people's happiness or not. I care about that it's telling me the prosperity of economic prosperity of a country, and that's what every other trader is looking at, and that's what they're reacting to. So that's what I care about. Okay, so ultimately that is why I look at GDP and nothing else, and I treat it very, very seriously. So what we're going to get into now is really, how is GDP measured? Okay, so what? GDP is, and I'm glad actually we had a big chat earlier, because I said that GDP is basically the total value of goods and services produced. But can you see, very, very difficult. How would you measure that? Right? We've got all these millions and millions and millions of items that people are buying and companies are producing, and I don't know why I'm doing this. What the hell is that? Basically I'd be drawing thousands of items: cameras, laptops, phones, speakers, this, that, desks, furniture, beds, all this stuff, right? Houses and all sorts, basically. I'm not going to draw it all, but basically that is what GDP is. How do you measure that? Virtually impossible, right? There's different So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit, is how the BEA in the US comes up with US GDP. How do they actually measure it, right? What is this number that they give us and they say it's gone up 3%? How do they derive it? Where does it come from? I mean, the point is that it is ultimately the output, right? What they're trying to tell us, and I think it was about 22 trillion, right, with the T, dollars. One of the biggest economies, I believe the UK is like 2 or 3 trillion, so 10 times bigger. The total value of goods and services produced in the US at the time of me doing this course is $22 trillion of things, of services were produced last year. How was that measured? How did they know that 22 trillion value of goods? And I'm talking dollars, right? Obviously not units, because you can't say 100 or 1,000 million units, because obviously every unit has a different value, right? A camera might be worth $500, a laptop might be worth $3,000, obviously extreme example, but you can see why it has to be the dollar value of everything produced. How do they measure this, basically? So there's different ways of measuring it. There's the expenditure approach, income approach, okay, and there's obviously measuring the output, essentially trying to find out how many goods were produced, services, and so on and so forth. You can see why it's a lot easier to kind of approach it from this angle, because ultimately things that are produced get bought. So we can see how much did people spend. If people spent something, they spent it on goods and services. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go into the final bit, which is this. This is going to be quite a long section. It's going to be very informal, like I said. Just be relaxed and just take it as it comes, and because it would be easier for me to say, hey, just go on the BEA website and you'll find out what GDP is, and I'm just going to kind of show you how we analyze it as traders, and take this more as a bonus. I'm actually going to sit here and spend a lot of time explaining a very, very difficult subject to you, because even though it may not help you specifically day to day as a trader, I just want you to grasp how important this number is and how all the other items feed into it. And I don't see anything out there, anything. You send me something, I don't think you'll be able to find it. I have not seen anything out there that explains how all of these other factors, manufacturing, services, payrolls, and how they're related to GDP, why we look at these things, and how is GDP even calculated. I don't see anything out there on it, right? So it would be easy for me to say, hey, go on the BEA website, so just go and click this button, Bureau of Economic Analysis, BEA, latest release, right? Where is it gone? Gross domestic product, here, or whatever, basically, whenever it was produced, it was to the end, wasn't it? There we go, gross domestic product by state. In fact, I can't find the exact release, but anyway, it's on the page somewhere. But yeah, go to the BEA website. In fact, you can see it there, sorry, view, okay. Go to the BEA website and basically, good luck, go and figure it out. It's all there, and I know it is, but honestly, you're going to get completely lost. So hopefully you see this as a good thing. You're welcome to skip this section, but I think it's so important. I'm going to really show you something that no one else, I've never seen it, right? I wasn't even taught this at an investment bank. I've had to really figure a lot of this stuff out myself. And like I said, I want to give you amazing value in this course. So we're going to break down GDP. I'm going to show you kind of why it's important to think of it in component parts, and how kind of the data that you're looking at throughout the month, like you've got week 1 manufacturing services payrolls, and week 2 inflation data, week 3 retail sales, week 4 obviously the GDP, sometimes FOMC, and etc, the standard way that data comes out. Why it's important to think of GDP in the context of those 4 weeks and how they all relate to each other, and that's why I think it's really, really important. So anyway, look, let's get on with it. So the first thing we're going to basically look at is a circular circular flow of income. Okay. Now, if you've done economics before, this is going to be very familiar to you. Sorry, it's handwriting's terrible on this tablet thing. Sorry about this. Let me just do it properly. Circular flow, or maybe my handwriting's terrible in general. We don't write much these days, right? We always type. Circular flow of income. So that's one thing we're going to discuss now, because GDP is incredibly complex. Okay, because if you think about it, yes, $22 trillion worth of goods are being produced and services, but who is consuming those services? Consumers, the government, businesses, right? Ultimately, it's those three are the main sectors. You know, very, very difficult to really grasp all the different variety of things going on there without looking at it in a very, very basic model. So as a new economics student, this is something that most economic students are taught about, is the circular flow of income. And it's to help them understand a very, very complex I just cannot, even words will not do this justice, how vast that is. $22 trillion of things, services being produced every year in the US. It's just vast, right? I mean, it's just, you just cannot even put it into something visible. It's just so, I mean, you know, it's just incredible. But the point is, for us to be able to do that, but we have to do it. I need to somehow get that across to you. There's something called the circular flow of income that most economic students are taught about. So we're going to do that, okay? And don't worry, they will then go on and do like hundreds of pages like of stuff. This is about all we need to know. Don't take it further than this. That's why I didn't want to just leave you guys, because you may go off on tangents you don't need to. We're going to do it together, okay? I'm going to show you exactly how much you kind of need to know. I'm going to keep it quite basic. I am getting a little bit into economics, but I'm going to make sure that it's manageable for everyone and it's actually really interesting and, you know, can be understood by everyone. So let's basically talk about this.